Welcome to already with the imperfection. Welcome to week 3 of the Adam Strauss exposure, and it's already going extremely well in the sense that, so the idea, this is an exposure in the sense of an OCD exposure. You willingly confront the feared situation or stimuli to get freedom. And what I'm trying to confront here is my perfectionism by doing a very imperfect video. And whatever I said, week 3, we're already off to a good start. So this has to be a relatively quick one for 2 reasons. I'm in San Francisco. It's my last night here, and I got to pack, I got to clean, and then I want to see Anna. And also, it is foggy, characteristically foggy here. Not a lot of light, and the light is fading as the day draws to a close. So I don't have much external illumination. All right, yeah, this is turning into a great exposure because I'm like, why are you telling people about your luminance levels for your video? Excellent. It's been a good week. Can I reduce it that simply? Well, yeah, let's get caught up. So I have continued to experience a, for me, remarkable, and I would say unprecedented in some ways, level of freedom over my addiction to optimization and over these associated thought patterns and behavior patterns. I've talked about these in past weeks, but essentially, I'm not doing a lot of these little optimizy thingies I do, and have done for many years, and often not even totally, well, I'm conscious of them, but I haven't seen them as a problem until a couple of weeks ago, as I shared, when it suddenly became clear to me that they are a problem. They're a problem because they consume a lot of time and a lot of energy, and I've been able to cut a lot of them out. Checking weather, my obsessively checking weather to decide what day to go on a hike. The limitation I gave myself is I can check weather once a day. I've been able to adhere to that. I'm not checking weather in places I'm not. This weird obsession with, I'm in San Francisco, but what would the weather be like if I was in New York? Don't check it, and I'm not checking it. Not giving voice to regret statements. I wish I had, or I should have. And what I'm finding, and Anna had told me this was the case with her own sort of transformation that she'd gone through before I met her, is she said, when I stopped complaining out loud, very quickly I stopped complaining in my head, and I found that to be true too, just in these last couple of weeks. Yeah. And generally I think the most remarkable thing for me is the level of my mental chatter it's reduced, I don't know, like 80%. There's just not that much dialogue in my head. What happens is I will start to go into some sort of dialogue in my head about anything. But typically these things are about, I guess the monologue, but I call it a dialogue because I often address myself in the second person, you. It is a dialogue. I'm talking to myself, which of course raises the fundamental question of, who is the I who's listening? I'm not going to get into that. This is the challenge of doing something totally unscripted, is I can lose the thread of my thought. Anyway, a lot of this dialogue has just kind of dropped away. Not effortlessly, but with minimal effort. I find myself having a thought that I don't need to have. A thought often about the future. Basically, these are often future-based thoughts, trying to figure out how a situation is going to play out, or judgment thoughts, just judging something. And judgment is necessary. There are times where we need to assess and judge, but these are judgments that are not connected to my actual reality in that moment. Sort of deciding, how do I feel about something? Yeah, and I will say, how do I feel about this week of the Adam Strauss exposure? Did I even say the name up top? I don't remember. This is the Adam Strauss exposure. How do I feel about this week? Not good. Not good. But good. It's a good exposure. A lot of freedom there. A lot of freedom. And it's just freed up a lot of bandwidth. I feel like I'm working a lot more effectively because I'm more present. I think that sort of is the net effect of these changes, is that I am more fully present in whatever reality I find myself in. And I think, indeed, that's why I've developed all of these habits of thinking about the future, regretting the past, judging my current situation. I think part of it is to take me out of the present. And I think that can be adaptive. If there's a great deal of pain in your life, removing yourself to some extent from that pain, I think it can be adaptive. Dissociation is adaptive when people are undergoing horrible traumas to get, separate. But this raises the question I've hit upon before is, what was my horrible trauma? I don't know, but I know from a very early age there were these habits. I wasn't checking the weather at age 4, but these habits, if not designed to, at least they functioned to take me out of the present. A lot of fantasy. I remember being 7 or 8 years old, 10 maybe a little. I remember at first grade, and the teacher was up there, and I'm just spinning out these elaborate fantasies, often fantasies where I'm heroic. I remember, there had been some sort of terrorist attack in Israel. This would have been probably the 80s. And I remember imagining, if terrorists attacked my school, and in this scenario, I was the hero. And not interestingly, really just tellingly, obviously, unsurprisingly, even at that age, part of my heroism was rescuing a girl who I had a prepubescent crush on. So again, but it wasn't obvious to me what in my life was so painful that I had to escape, but there was a great deal of pain from an early age. I got into these extremely intense fights with my mother about essentially nothing. She would tell me, not about nothing, but about things that basically I would refuse to listen. I would refuse to pick up my toys. I would refuse to put away my book and come down for dinner. And she would insist, and I would refuse, and these fights would escalate, and I would become enraged. There was sort of this hair trigger from an extremely early age. Stuff that is consistent, I think, my understanding of trauma, consistent with some sort of trauma, but no trauma has ever revealed itself. When I began working with psychedelics, there was this great fear that, oh my God, I'm going to see this horrible thing that I've buried and it's going to destroy me. And I had some trips where I really was like, oh no, I can't see the truth, but I need to see the truth, but I can't see the truth. And when I finally let go and was just like, all right, whatever it is, let me see it, there was nothing there. So perhaps these habits of projecting into the future, thinking about the past, avoiding the present, did have some adaptive value. But I think at this point, it's another way my mind tries to control. Maybe that's all it is. That's all it is. In the present, there's no illusion of control, because in the present, you see that things are just unfolding. Whereas the past, the future, thinking about the future, you can have some illusion, again, of, I can figure this stuff out, I can control this stuff. So, but a lot of freedom from that. And consciously thinking, come back to this present moment. Come back to this present moment instead of thinking about some future thing you don't have to worry about. And this is not a new realization for me at all. I had an ayahuasca experience where I was in Peru. And at this retreat center, there were a lot of dogs, that were the pets of the people who ran this center. They didn't do much. They just kind of slept during the day. But ostensibly, at least one of the reasons the dogs were there is because jaguars they might even be extinct, but they're at any rate very rare in the Amazon now. So my understanding is that the most concrete animal threat is snakes. And the dogs, at least in part, are there so that if a snake, comes out of the bush, it can pounce on that snake. And in this one ayahuasca ceremony, I was thinking about these dogs, and I thought about the fact that these dogs, they're very chilled out. I mean, it's hot in Peru, but they're just kind of lolling about in the dirt, relaxed or playing. I don't know what's going on in their heads, but it seems to me they're not so worried about the snakes that could potentially come out of the woods. And I had the thought that, they just, if a snake comes out, they'll deal with that snake. There's no point in them thinking about and strategizing, how am I going to deal with the snake? Whereas I spend a huge amount of mental energy worrying about, what I began to call ghost snakes, snakes that don't actually exist but could exist. and strategizing. What am I going to do if this thing happens that I don't want to happen? What am I going to do? And sometimes it's not even things I don't want to happen. Sometimes it's good things, but actually thinking and often having imaginary conversations, how these conversations will play out in the future. A lot of planning. But the truth is, that doesn't make me more effective. Yes, a certain degree of planning and strategizing for specific circumstances can be valuable. If I'm going on stage with a very important show, I'll have some idea what I'm going to talk about, unless if it's one of my unscripted shows. So sure. But most of these ghost snakes I spend so much mental energy worrying about either would never materialize, or if they do materialize, they're not going to materialize the way I've envisioned them. And in fact, all this thinking, all this strategizing is actually counterproductive, because if a snake does emerge from the woods, metaphorically, I'm not just going to be fully engaging with that snake in that moment, I'm also going to be referencing my past thoughts about it, my rehearsal for it, which will probably make me less effective in that moment of truth. And so after this ayahuasca experience, which was 6 years ago, for a while I was able to catch these tendencies to unnecessarily strategize about the future. And what I would do is I would just say, ghost snake, ghost snake. This is a non-existent snake I'm trying to deal with right now. It's a ghost snake. But I lost that. But yeah, I haven't even had to say ghost snake to myself now. It's just, oh, I'm thinking about something I don't need to think about. Just let it go. So, and seeing also the temptation to go into thought. There is something addictive. And I think maybe this relates to my addiction to optimization. Maybe there's a sense of, oh, I'm being productive because I'm thinking about things. But again, it's the opposite. And so letting it go has freed up a tremendous amount of space in my head. And that's been great. But I don't know. You know, the idea of water filling the volume of whatever shape it's given to fill. Maybe that's the way it is with me with fear. Though as I say that, no, that metaphor doesn't quite work here. I guess what I'm trying to get to is maybe what's happened this week is, since I've let go of a lot of these unnecessary sort of mild obsessive anxieties, a new fear is coming in, but not an entirely new fear. But it's coming in a new way, in an intense way. And I found myself struggling with major, I wouldn't say major. I'm going to scratch the major part. I found myself struggling with doubts about, yeah, this is telling. I was going to say Anna, my partner, but actually the doubts are not about her. The doubts are about us, about this relationship. As I've shared before, about 1.5 years ago, I had a mushroom trip where I realized, why have I not been in like a really deep relationship? Why have I not been unambiguously, unambivalently, fully in love? Why haven't I just even had someone who I could say, hey, this is my girlfriend? Like, I haven't even been able to use that word in like 20 years. Why? Despite the fact that I feel like, oh, what I most want is a deep, deep connection. Why haven't I had it? And on this mushroom trip, I saw the most obvious thing. The reason I haven't had it is because I don't really want it. Or, more accurately, I do really want it, but I don't want the vulnerability that comes along with a deep connection. I wanted an impossibility, a oxymoron. I wanted love and connection without vulnerability. And seeing that on that mushroom trip, I felt something shift. And 4 days after that was the first time I really connected with Anna. We met briefly before. We talk about how I manifested her. And I did, in a sense. If it was not for that mushroom trip, this relationship would not have happened and be happening now for over 16 months. And part of what I saw, though, on that trip is why am I alone? I'm afraid. I'm afraid of the vulnerability. But the way specifically, operationally, that my mind has come up to keep me alone has been WIBLI, an acronym I've made up. WWIBLI, what would it be like if? And it's this thing my mind does very obsessively, comparing whatever moment or situation I find myself in with an imagined moment or situation, and I would do this with women I was with. Oh yeah, we're having pretty good conversation, but what would it be like if we were having even better conversation? What would it be like if she were more beautiful? What would it be like if we had better sexual chemistry? What would it be like if it was a different reality? And on this mushroom trip a year and a half ago, I was like, oh, I'm doing this to protect myself. And if I really want to open my heart, it's going to certainly involve saying yes to a relationship, even with my mind basically saying in some ways, she's not quite good enough. She could be better. This could be better. I was certain my mind wouldn't shut up. And one of the stunning things about Anna is she proved that wrong. There's been no wibbly with her. None. There's really never been, I'm trying to think if this is true, and it is true. There's really never been a moment where I'm like, yeah, she's great, but I wish she were more like this, or I wish she were less like that. And I think that's a testament, well, it's a testament to one of two, or maybe both things. Thing one is how fucking amazing she is. Yeah, she is maybe just essentially wibbly proof. She is just astonishingly brilliant, just a ferocious intellect, incredibly sensitive, self-aware, considerate, very beautiful. Yeah, she checks every possible box for me. And she creates new boxes that I didn't even have before and checks those. Like there's things now that I have from her where I'm like, oh, if this relationship doesn't last, I'm going to need these from other people. Like just how bold she is. Yeah, she's very, very courageous in a lot of ways. And I don't want to talk too much about this because I am leery of violating her privacy. Obviously, she knows I talk about her and she watches these videos, but I don't want to talk too much about her journey. I can give you one I think it's sort of a telling example. So we're on a cross-country flight and someone is farting on this flight and it is awful. And it is just going on and on and on for like 40 minutes. And then suddenly Anna just stands up in the middle of the plane and is like, excuse me, everyone, excuse me. Someone is farting and it has to stop now. It's been going on for far too long. So whoever it is, go to the bathroom, take care of it. But it's not fair to the rest of us. It's not right. I mean, she made it a moral issue. I'm not saying she's Rosa Parks, but I feel like it's on the same continuum. And I was just looking up at her and I just felt so much admiration for her courage, standing up for the greater good, and her integrity. And I felt so much relief that she didn't realize I was farting. So, no, I'm joking. I wasn't farting. If I had been farting, well, she of course asked me if it was me early on, and I would have said, yeah, it's me. And we would have joked about it. Because we conceal nothing from each other. Nothing. And I think that is maybe the single thing that we both value the most about this relationship. So yeah, maybe she's just wibbly proof. Or maybe, I think it's probably an and, not an or, I have made progress. That mushroom trip was transformative. And transformative, of course, in the way psychedelic journeys are really transformative. Not the way people often imagine, like they just are going to fix things. That was the way I imagined it before I began working with psychedelics 17 years ago. No, transformative in that you get a glimpse of something, you get a taste of something, and then you work on it. Integration. So I think perhaps, I have gotten more freedom from the wibbly generally. But, I've had really no doubts about Anna, which is completely unprecedented for me. Yeah. I guess one other thought that just occurred to me is also it could be the fact that, I saw how long Wibbly kept me alone for. And I say alone, there were women, but again, not like really unambiguously just fully opening myself up, saying yes, fully saying yes. So I've been able to fully say yes to Anna, and it has been, to my surprise, effortless. Effortless. But there have been these non-specific fears. And I've talked about this. There certainly has been an awareness that as much as a part of me wants to say yes to this, a part of me doesn't want to say yes to this because it is so vulnerable. I am so open to her. But I've chosen to say yes with the fear that comes along with this deep vulnerability. And of course, the depth of that vulnerability also is commensurate with the depth of our love. By opening up so deeply, we can love each other deeply, and that feels wonderful. But for reasons that I really don't have any idea of what they are, a few days ago, I just started having these intense doubts. Again, not about Anna. There was no thought of like, oh, maybe I'd be better off with someone else, or I wish she were different. None of that. And it wasn't even a thought of maybe I want to be alone. It was just this thought, though I have had that thought at times. Just because it feels a lot fucking safer being alone. But I'm committed to this. I'm committed to vulnerability. I'm committed to saying yes. So it wasn't even that. Really, what the thought was it was almost nonverbal. It was just kind of like, I don't know. Like, is this right? Is this right? Or, this doesn't feel quite right. No content. No specific content. No specific objections to her. No specific objections to being in a relationship with her. No specific fears. Just that, I'm not sure about this. I don't know if this feels quite right. And this has cropped up periodically in recent months. But it was more intense than it's been. By which I mean there was more of a visceral load associated with it. Let me be more specific. There was fear in my body. And of course, the temptation is try to figure out the answer. Is this right? Is this not right? Think about it. But, I know that road leads nowhere. Thank God I've learned that. I know I'm not going to figure it out by thinking about it. And I told myself that you're not going to figure this out by thinking about it, especially because there's nothing to think about. There's no specific objections. It's a very simple question. Do I want to say yes to this? And the answer is yes. So there's no problem. But again, the fear was fairly intense. And I thought about sharing this with her. Because as I just said, we do share everything. But this felt a little bit dangerous. It felt like, is this a little bit of an OCD thing? Because there is a form of OCD called relationship OCD, a very common form of OCD. Now, I want to acknowledge that the idea of having doubts about one's partner is, if not universal, I would say extraordinarily common. And clearly not everyone who has doubts about a partner has relationship OCD. As with everything we call mental illness, this stuff exists on a continuum. One of the many, many vehement objections I have to Western psychiatry and psychology is these sort of categorical characterizations and sort of this binary way of looking at things. That said, I think a good guideline, a good diagnostic criteria for whether or not it's OCD is how much distress and impairment does it cause. So if you occasionally find yourself worrying, maybe I'm not with the right person, that's normal if it's sort of these transitory thoughts. But if it's something that starts to dominate, that would qualify as relationship OCD. You guys, whoever's watching this, may be having relationship OCD about me right now. I don't know about this. Is this the right video to be watching? All right. Believe me, I'm having relationship OCD with myself. So I've always been scared of relationship OCD because it just feels like, that's an unanswerable question. Am I with the right person? How can you possibly answer that? There's 8 billion people on the planet. And in fact, I would say you're definitely not with the optimal person. Mathematically, there's probably someone better out there. But given the realities of time and space, it's a judgment call. Looking for certainty in that question seems impossible. And I've been, again, amazed and relieved that I have had none of this with Anna. But now when this doubt was flaring up, this very non-specific doubt, it's like, is this kind of an OCD thing? Is this some relationship OCD? And if it is, sharing it with her is not going to be helpful because essentially I'd be looking for her to somehow make me feel better, give me some reassurance in some way. I don't know what that would look like, but yeah. What was really cropping up is she had sent me this text, so I think I mentioned, I'm going to New York tomorrow, that she's having some, anxiety about our separation. And my thought when I saw that text was, I'm not having anxiety about our separation. I'm actually kind of grateful for it. So I didn't want to respond to that text, me too. But I also didn't want to respond to that text, oh, well, I'm relieved that we're separating. I resolved not to say slang to her, but then when I saw her that night, last 2 nights ago, I did. I said, I'm just having these doubts and they're not about anything. And I should say, she has certainly expressed doubts about me, but these are very much content doubts. She has doubts because of things I do, behavioral, I would say things actually that are all kind of related to OCD. Very understandable, very reasonable doubts. Things about me that affect her. And I've made progress on those things. And I'm grateful she shared those doubts because it's been a huge part of my healing. What has accelerated my healing and growth over the past year and a half, this relationship has been profoundly helpful. Just seeing how what I do affects other people, affects someone, because for so long, being essentially alone, even if I'm, there's someone I'm having sex with or a friend with benefit situation or someone I'm dating, but not having someone who I really am deeply enmeshed with, has deprived me of the sort of mirror of seeing how what I can do affects people. So seeing how it affects her, seeing how these OCD tendencies affect her, has showed me these things that otherwise I might not be aware of and given me an incentive to change them. So yeah, when she has shared doubts, it's sometimes been painful, but it has been helpful. It's been, I would say, productive. But how is it helpful being like, hey, I'm just having doubts for no obvious reason about this relationship? That's actually scarier. It's like, what's the metaphor that's coming to mind? Whenever you read about some like horrible act of violence, for me at least, it's kind of comforting in a way when you're like, oh, the perpetrator and the victim knew each other. Right? It's like, yeah, it's not just random. Or the victim was, clearly taking some outsized risk. Basically the idea of like, there's something I can do to protect myself from this happening. But telling someone I'm just having doubts and I don't know why and there's nothing specific there, yeah, what can she do to address that? Nothing. And it affected her strongly, very strongly. How could it not? I mean, she's never been as vulnerable with anyone as she is with me. And I've never been as vulnerable with anyone as I am with her. And we're very in love and we're very connected. And to hear that your partner is having doubts, yeah. But man, I have so much respect for her. So much respect. Because what she did is she was really able to watch herself, even in real time, even as I was telling this, and see her tendencies and share them with me. She went to the bathroom. I told her this. She had to go to the bathroom. She came back and she said, yeah, I see that like my mind is already figuring out how to separate from this. Her mind was figuring out ways to protect her from this, to mitigate this profound vulnerability. And she made a conscious choice not to go into that, but of course it was painful. And we talked about it. We talked about what is this ultimately about? And I think, meaning like, why is this doubt surfacing now? I think probably the biggest answer is just as the vulnerability increases, doubts are going to, at least some of the time, pop up because my mind is extraordinarily adept at protecting me. And the deepest pain I've had in my life was a deep heartbreak, the loss of, I would say, the first love of my life. Anna is the second. 20-something years ago. I developed OCD after that relationship ended. So it makes perfect sense that my mind sees, oh God, you're super, super vulnerable again. In fact, I'd say more vulnerable with Anna, because with that relationship 20 years ago, I wasn't even aware of my vulnerability. With Anna, yeah, it is deeper. So of course my mind is going to be like, hey, we got to shut this thing down. And again, with other women, it might be like, yeah, you should back out of this. She's not hot enough. She's not smart enough. You don't have the right, conversational connection. But my mind is powerless to do that with Anna because she's so amazing. So it just has to go for this general, yeah, I'm not sure about this whole thing. This general feeling of doubt and fear. yeah, makes a lot of sense. I mean, that's ultimately what OCD is about, is trying to protect us. So, I swear to God, this is a very quiet street in San Francisco. But whenever I try to do these videos, people drive by blaring like, if it was good hip hop, that would be one thing. But just very like, yeah, there's a lot of shitty hip hop nowadays. I feel very old. Shitty hip hop nowadays. All right. Anyway, this is a great exposure for me. So, I think, yeah, these doubts may just be about avoiding vulnerability. But a couple of other possibilities came up as Anna and I talked through this. And I think one is, I do feel I'm in a really good place. I feel stronger. I'm not giving into a lot of these little tendencies to optimize. I'm less in my head. I'm more present. And I think there is something to the idea of when I feel more broken, more damaged, I feel maybe more of a, not dependency on Anna, but well, she said, maybe it's a feeling like, oh, I should just be grateful for her, because I should be grateful for anyone who can, who isn't deterred by the sometimes baroque machinations of my mind. That was a very, let me phrase that in a more accessible way. Yeah, just these sort of OCD, obsessional anxiety tendencies I have. So maybe that's part of it, is feeling stronger and feeling less of a, dependence isn't quite the right word, but yeah, feeling, that could explain maybe me feeling more open to the possibility, like, oh, maybe she's not right. Again, not really she's not right, it's this isn't right. Another possibility, she said, is it's like, at this point, I've kind of won her over. There is, I will admit it, for me, and I think it's probably universal, there is something about the conquest. For men, at least, maybe for women too, I can only speak for myself. And yeah, there's, she's very committed to me. And perhaps a part of me, I don't want to say loses interest, because I haven't lost interest, but it's like, yeah, feeling like I conquered. Part of me is shying away from that word, because I feel like, oh, that sounds like aggressive and martial, but yeah, like I've won her over, let's put it that way. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's a possibility. And then the other thing is, as I mentioned, I've cut out weed. I'm committed to not smoking weed for 33 days. And that was an addiction. Even though I only smoked once or twice a week, the looking forward to it, the obsessing about should I or shouldn't I smoke. And I have sort of an addict's mind. I'm always looking for a fix, a hit, an optimization. So maybe by having given up so many of these optimization strategies, my mind is now looking at is looking for another hit, essentially. And certainly there is a hit in a new relationship. There is a high in a new relationship. And honestly, I still have that with her to a large extent. But I think after 16 months, my friend Carl, I keep telling him how like the honeymoon phase hasn't ended with Anna. And he's like, dude, it ended like a long time ago. You just don't realize it because things are still so wonderful. I don't know if it has ended, but maybe it is ending. Maybe we are settling into more of, I don't know, I don't want to say routine. Yeah, I mean, she still excites me, everything about this relationship. But maybe the hormonal hit of a new relationship, maybe that is starting to dissipate. I don't know. But I know I regretted sharing this doubt with her because it was very painful for her and it didn't really clarify anything for me. And last night was difficult initially, the day after I'd shared these doubts, but then we just started connecting and everything fell away and we had a wonderful night, as we almost always have a wonderful time together. And those doubts have completely gone. Completely gone. I'm in love with her. I want to be with her. I want this to get deeper. I want this to go further. I'm going to New York tomorrow. I'm not going to see her. I'll be there for about 3.5 weeks. I will miss her. Though even as I say that, there is a part of me that's like, yeah, having a little bit of a break isn't bad. yeah, I know I want to be with her. But I guess I already said it. I also know there's a part of me that, above all, wants to protect me from vulnerability. And I'm always going to be more vulnerable with my heart open like this. Because this is the thing about the 20 years where I wasn't really in a deeply vulnerable relationship, is yes, I was very lonely. Loneliest in some ways when I was in a relationship, but not a vulnerable one. But no one could really hurt me. When those relationships ended, either for me or for them, there might be some sadness, but yeah, there was no real deep feeling of loss. So I think what I do is I appreciate my mind for the ways it's trying to protect me, and I make the decision, the very simple decision, do I want to say yes to this? And the answer to that is yes, and so I will. Yeah. All right. It is starting to get dark here, and I think I'm going to wrap up this week. I will be broadcasting to you next week from New York. So I was going to say tune in next time. What am I, fucking a talk show host? All right, I'm done. Thanks for listening. I mean, this is for me and my own recovery, but I do appreciate people tuning in.